And now behold, I am going to my people. Come, I will let you know what this people will do to your people in the latter days. And he took up his discourse and said, the oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eye is opened, the oracle of him who hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty falling down with his eyes uncovered. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. Edom shall be dispossessed, Seir also. His enemies shall be dispossessed. Israel is doing valiantly. And one from Jacob shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of cities. And he looked on Amalek and took up his discourse and said, Amalek was the first among the nations, but its end is utter destruction. And he looked on the Kenite and took up his discourse and said, enduring is your dwelling place, and your nest is set in the rock. Nevertheless, Cain shall be burned when Asher takes you away captive. And he took up his discourse and said, alas, who shall live when God does this? But ships shall come from Kittim and shall afflict Asher and Eber, and he too shall come to utter destruction. Then Balaam rose and went back to his place, and Balak also went his way. Thus ends the reading of God's word. Once upon a time, I heard a couple who were working with Amway, which is a Ponzi sales scheme agency, and their boss took them to a rich neighborhood and told them to dream of living in this nice neighborhood and promised them that if they worked hard enough, they'd get there. It sounded to me like the American dream on speed and toxic ambition. I also heard a tale of one young man's advice to another. The young advisor said, if anybody critiques you, you critique them right back. And have you ever heard the saying, fortune favors the bold? The idea is that if you are bold, ambitious, and proud, the good life will be available to you. If you critique the critical, you won't have to deal with them as much. And it is supposed if you long for a rich life strongly enough, you'll get there. But the scriptures suppose a different way. And this prophecy of Balaam in particular reveals the eventual end of the proud. And even if it takes hundreds of years to come to pass, the Lord will bring low those who boldly lift themselves up and fancy themselves indestructible. And instead, he will lift up a kingless people living in tents in the desert. In an old movie, some adventurers found a dungeon that was full of booby traps. And it was full of booby traps to protect the treasure hidden therein. And so two men went and sought the treasure, but they were killed instantly and gruesomely. And so a third man, who knew some of the clues to get through the dungeon, must try to get through. And his first clue was, only the penitent man shall pass. Only the penitent man shall pass. Penitent, prayerful, humble. So as he approached to seek the treasure, he bowed low and thereby missed the giant blade that would have beheaded him. By humbling himself, he was able to pass on to the next trial. And I tell this story to point out the similarity to the text before us. A scepter-wielding star will arise out of the nation of Israel, according to this prophecy. Kids, do you know what a scepter is? It's like a club, but it's used kind of as a metaphor for a reigning king. Jesus waves his scepter over pagans. And if we stand against him, we will fall. But if we bow, we will be blessed. The scepter of the promised Messiah is like a severing blade that cuts those that approach in a haughty way and saves those that approach humbly. And Jesus himself is assuredly the fulfillment of this star that comes out of Jacob. The star witnessed at Jesus' birth was so amazing that astronomers from hundreds of miles away left home and crossed deserts bearing gifts for a prophesied king. And if that star wasn't enough to reveal him as king, notice which king in all the earth has been reigning the longest in history. It's Jesus. It is the year 2024, 2024 years of Jesus' reign. 4 eyewitness accounts tell us that Jesus, who died on the cross, did not stay dead, but rather rose and ascended to his throne in heaven. This is the him who Balaam sees by God's revealing power in this prophecy. This is the far-off one who crushes all his enemies with the very scepter of his rule. Recall that Balaam was hired to curse Israel. But with each new prophecy, Balaam more and more blesses Israel. And now with this final prophecy, the erstwhile curse is reversed into a curse on the very ones who hired him, Moab. And through the recipients of this very destructive prophecy, we see a few things that God is not impressed by. These are characteristics that do not stave off the destructive power of God's anointed king. And we see one thing that he blesses. But let's allow that truth to sink in for a moment, if you didn't know it already, that God's king is violent and destructive. It's not just merely the Old Testament. This is the New Testament king as well. He tears down, he decapitates, he takes captive. And if you only thought of God's king as sweet baby Jesus, no wonder you've been ignoring him. But if you can see, or if you have a foreboding that Jesus may be more than just a cute spokesperson for Christmas, then you'll want to notice what puts one on his bad side. Well, here are a few things from the text that don't put you on his good side. These are things that God is not impressed by. Number 1, family relation. Family relation. In the Exodus generation, God told Israel to pass by Edom and Moab. Don't fight against them. Don't provoke them. Don't go through their land. The Lord had told Israel not to fight Moab and Edom because they were Israel's relatives. Moab's father was Lot, the cousin of Abraham. And Edom was descended from Abraham's grandson, Esau. So Moab and Edom were distant relatives of Israel, but in Balaam's prophecy, Edom will be dispossessed. And the text hints that the one dispossessing is Israel. Israel's doing valiantly. But with Moab, whom Balaam was hired by, the actor is clear in Moab's demise. It is the scepter-wielding star of Jacob. Despite being family, Moab and Edom do not escape judgment at the hands of God's anointed. And there's 2 applications for listeners here. If the Lord has passed over you and your sin, or in your family's sin in the past, that doesn't mean you're fine and that personal or cultural sin will never receive judgment. You see, he said, don't go into Moab, don't go into Edom. Moab and Edom could have thought, oh, we're good. We can just stay like this. If the Lord will even judge Israel's relations harshly, how then will he deal with us who are no blood relation to Abraham? Secondly, if God isn't impressed by family relation, then you can't coast on your family's name. Family is important. Minister to them first, take care of them, honor them, but do not presume that you are safe because of your family. Covenant children, you need to call upon the name of the Lord yourself. And parents, just because your children are doing well grants you no eternal comfort. They could be doing great, but if you are in rebellion, God will deal with you as he did with the Moabites. Number 2, God is not impressed by your victim status. By your victim status. You would think that since Israel had been a victim of oppression and violence, she would be especially sensitive to anyone who was also a victim. You would think that Jesus himself, who was a victim of injustice, that he would be especially tolerant of similar victims, but he's not. See verse 19. And one from Jacob shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of cities. The one from Jacob who exercises dominion is Jesus, and all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him according to the prophet Daniel and according to Jesus' own words in Matthew 28. That Jesus exercises dominion is not surprising. How he exercises his dominion is jarring to hear. He will destroy the survivors of cities. Destroying survivors sounds like the worst kind of tyrant. Destroying a city is one thing, but then following up with a strike on the refugees fleeing the city? What? And whether you like it or not, that is the destructive prerogative of the Lord's anointed. Survivors were not absolved of their sin because they didn't die in the first skirmish. Even if all of a person's friends were to die in an attack on a city, that does not absolve the survivor of their sin. This is a hard teaching. But we must admit that authority to make these calls has not fallen to us. It is the Lord's decision whose sin he calls to account and when. Relinquish any judgments on God for his judgments. Furthermore, the severity of this victory reminds us of the totality of Jesus' victory on the cross. Jesus did not merely hobble death and sin, Satan and self. He dealt them a death blow. They will not come back and conquer him later once they've raised a bigger army. Jesus' victory is total. And when that day of judgment comes, whether you make it to that great and final day or whether you die in a car accident tomorrow, there will be no more second chances. Many people suffer terrible hardships in their lives, and the death of loved ones rises to the top of the list of hardships that a person has to suffer. But worse than that is if your whole hometown is destroyed. You'd think a God of mercy would let such a person have a pass. Such suffering surely deserves some sort of remuneration for hardship. No. Suffering does not curry favor with the Lord. You don't earn righteousness for suffering. And certainly not for suffering for your own sin, which happens to be the most common form of suffering. So, in application, just because you've suffered at the hand of a government, a father, a boss, a spouse, does not make you righteous, does not render you immune from God's judgment, does not impress the Lord. If God will judge the survivors of cities, those who have watched their neighbors die around them, then he will not pass over you because you're a victim. Number 3, the Lord is not impressed by the indigenous argument. Indigenous, children, means original, the original peoples of a certain land. In other words, bless me because I was here first. I was first in line. I should get it. Amalek, according to verse 20, was supposedly first among the nations. Doesn't matter. She'll be judged as well, even unto utter destruction, the text says. Did you notice? Did anybody watch the Olympics? Did you see any Amalekite athletes at the Olympics? Not even an Amalekite flag or nation. Utter destruction, but they were here first. It's an old parent problem-solving routine to say, well, who had the toy first? Or it's a classic playground reasoning to say, I had the swing first. And as much as original ownership might help in a court of law, it holds little impression for the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He was here in the beginning. He made it all. So for some dust bunny to come along and claim he had it first, as Amalek presumably did, it just sounds like arrogance to the Lord and his anointed. What does this mean for us? It means that we cannot argue with him that because we had something at some point or other, it should be ours for eternity. To put it another way, if the Lord has taken something from you, you should not complain. You were merely a steward for a time. That you had it first matters little to him. He can see through that argument into your own bare self-interest. In fact, the more you insist on your own way, the more you hang on to things that you had first, the more he will take them away in order to put you in your place. So humble yourself before the Lord instead of hating him for taking away something you once had. Number 4, the Lord also is not impressed by might. Might makes right, or so the world says. Look at the might reflected by the Kenites and Asher in verses 21 through 24. Enduring is your dwelling place, and your nest is set in the rock. The Kenites had a mountain fortress. A mountain fortress. Any who study military history know that that's very good, very strong. Yet they were burned. They weren't in a wooden fortress. They weren't in a fortress of straw. They were in rock, yet they were burned. Asher was offensive. They were taking other nations captive. They were on the move. They were winning, but they themselves were judged. So neither the strongest defensive position you can take, fortified in the rock, or a strong offensive position, taking captive other peoples, protects you from the judgment of the Lord. And if that's the case on a national scale, how much more on a personal scale? But this doctrine also offers hope. It doesn't matter to the Lord how enshrined in power the wicked ones are. It doesn't matter if they're protected by rock or an island in the middle of the ocean, or if they're hiding in plain sight, or if they've taken the entire internet captive. The Lord will bring them low. I'm saying he's not impressed by strength, but I want to encourage you to grow in your strength as much as possible, to make your investments as crash-proof as possible, to make your home and church secure, and yet know that the Lord laughs at such security. If the Lord could take out the Kenites and the Ashurians, he can take out America. He can take out you and I. So the answer that some veer towards is, well, I guess I just got to be stronger then. No, that's not the answer. The answer is, the Lord is my strength and my song. The Proverbs say, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him. So if you have been able to bully your way through life up until this point, I'm here to tell you that that strategy will fail, as it failed for the Ashurians and it failed for the Kenites. Allow the Lord to be your hiding place instead. And finally, we get to one thing that the Lord will bless. He will bless a humble offering. Balaam falls down with eyes uncovered. There's no greater prostration one can have for worship. Balak has offered 7 bulls 3 times, 2 perfect numbers. But neither he nor Balaam nor even Israel are good examples of humbly offering themselves. In the very next verses in the book of Numbers, Balaam convinces Balak of a strategy to ensnare Israel through idol worship mixed with harlotry. And Israel falls hard for it. So we must look beyond the pages of this text for an example of a humble offering. And one of the best pictures of a humble offering comes from other pagans of the East. Others whom men would look to for a word from on high, as Balak did with Balaam. These were the Magoi. the wise men whose names we don't even know, who went on a pilgrimage to worship. And we see this in Matthew 2, which I'll read here for us. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." And then verses 9 through 12. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. And then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their country by another way. Will you humbly offer yourself and your gifts to the Lord? Will you humbly bow before the King of the Jews, the King of the world, the King for 2024 years reigning in heaven? Or will you stiffen your back, demand pity for your suffering, argue your pedigree or your rights with the Lord, and be broken down by the swing of his star scepter? O people, bow and be blessed. Lastly, we've said to bow and be blessed by him, stand and fall, or bow and be blessed. There was one who was cut down in the prime of his life, cut down in the most awful, gruesome way. And yet he was most blessed. He is most high. He is Jesus. Jesus is the one who takes all the penalty and punishment for the arrogance of mankind, and through him gives blessing to us all. He is the conduit of all of our blessing. Let's pray.